The day the aliens invaded Earth, I was elbow deep in robot excrement. Not literally, thank God, but that's what everyone calls the industrial sludge that builds up in Lunar Base's waste management facility. The robots that process our lovely moon colony's various forms of waste tend to get gunked up worse than a first-year engineering student's coffee maker. And guess who gets to clean them? That's right, Danny Ratchet O'Neill, Waste Management Robotics Specialist Extraordinaire. The job's not glamorous, but it pays well enough to keep me in synthetic coffee and contraband Earth snacks. Plus, I get to work alone, which means no one complains about my running commentary on the spectacular engineering failures I encounter daily. And here we have yet another example of what happens when you let theoretical physicists design practical machinery, I announced to the empty maintenance bay, waving my wrench at the half-dismantled cleaning bot before me. Sure, it can calculate quantum trajectories, but can it handle a banana peel? The answer, my friends, is no. No, it cannot. The robot, designation WM209, sat lifeless on my workbench, its primary waste processing unit completely seized up. These things were supposed to be self-cleaning, which was about as accurate as calling our base commander's toupee convincing. That's when every screen in the facility suddenly lit up with emergency broadcasts. I probably would have noticed sooner if I hadn't been playing old Earth rock music at volumes that would make safety inspectors cry. But even I couldn't miss the giant red warning signals reflecting off every surface in my workshop. I grabbed a rag to wipe the grime off my hands and turned down Bon Jovi just in time to hear, "This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill. Hostile forces have breached Mars colony defenses. All personnel report to emergency stations immediately." "Well, shit," I muttered, watching as footage from Mars started streaming across my screens. The Martian Defense Fleet, pride of human space military might, was being systematically demolished by what looked like giant metal space squids. Really efficient giant metal space squids. The base-wide comm system crackled. "All technical personnel report to Central Command immediately." There was a pause. "That includes waste management." I looked down at my grease-stained coveralls, then at the half-fixed robot, then at the screens showing chaos in space. You know what? I told WM209, I'm betting this is going to be way worse than that time they thought they discovered intelligent bacterial life in the septic system. Grabbing my tool belt because no way was I going anywhere without it. I headed for Central Command. As I walked through the corridors, I couldn't help but notice something odd about the invasion footage still playing on every screen. There was this weird feedback noise in the alien transmissions, a kind of mechanical whine that reminded me of... "Oh, you have got to be kidding me," I said, stopping dead in my tracks to stare at a particularly clear shot of one of the alien ships. "That's a coolant system about to fail. A really badly designed coolant system." No one else seemed to notice. They were all too busy running around like headless chickens, which I suppose is the appropriate response when faced with apparently unstoppable alien invaders. But I've spent 15 years fixing machines that everyone else called unstoppable, unfixable, or straight-up cursed. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that nothing is unstoppable, especially if it's making that particular whining noise. I picked up my pace, heading for Central Command with a spring in my step that probably wasn't appropriate given the whole invasion situation. But come on, I was finally going to get to fix something more interesting than waste-processing robots. As the doors to Central Command slid open, I was greeted by the sight of every important person on Lunar Base arguing over a holographic display of the solar system. Red dots representing alien ships were moving steadily from Mars toward Earth, with a smaller cluster breaking off toward the Moon. Base Commander Richards, his toupee slightly askew in the chaos, was mid-speech. "And if Mars couldn't stop them, we need to face the possibility that—" "Their ships are about to overheat," I interrupted, because tact has never been my strong suit. Every head in the room turned toward me, and I suddenly remembered I was still covered in robot grime. "Excuse me," Richard said in that tone that commanding officers use when they're trying to decide if they should have you court-martialed or committed. I pointed at the nearest screen showing alien footage. "Listen to that whine. Classic coolant system failure warning. Whoever designed these supposedly unstoppable war machines didn't account for basic thermal expansion in vacuum conditions. I've seen better engineering in first-generation mining robots. The room was dead silent for a moment before Tech Sergeant Patel, one of the few people who'd actually worked with me before, spoke up. "Commander O'Neill, she's actually got a point. There's definitely something off about their thermal signatures." And that's how I, the person who spends most days fixing robots that are literally full of crap, ended up being humanity's best hope against alien invasion. Sometimes the universe has a weird sense of humor like that. You know what's worse than being ignored, being listened to? Because once Tech Sergeant Patel backed up my observation about the alien ship's cooling systems, suddenly everyone wanted my expert opinion. The same people who usually treated me like something they'd scraped off their boots were now hanging on my every word. It was uncomfortable, like wearing a clean uniform. Technically possible, but deeply wrong. "Show me everything you've got on their ships," I demanded, trying to sound more confident than I felt. The holographic display shifted, showing detailed scans of the alien vessels. "And somebody get me coffee. The real stuff, not that synthesized garbage." Patel, bless her caffeinated soul, handed me her own cup without a word. She'd already pulled up multiple thermal imaging scans of the alien fleet, and what I saw made me whistle. "Well, there's your problem." "What problem?" Commander Richards demanded, his toupee now at a truly impressive angle. "These ships," I pointed at the largest vessels, "are only attacking within specific temperature ranges. Look at the Mars footage. They pulled back every time they entered direct sunlight for more than 20 minutes. They're running hot, way too hot, and they know it." Patel nodded, her fingers flying over the controls. "Correlating with Mars defense data. She's right. Every retreat coincides with periods of maximum solar exposure." "Of course I'm right. I spend my days keeping machines running in space. You think I don't know what an overheating engine looks like?" I took a long drink of coffee. These aliens, they've built themselves a fleet of glass cannons, incredibly powerful, sure, but one good push and they'll cook themselves. That's when Admiral Chen spoke up from the back of the room. I hadn't even noticed her arrive, which is typically how the day goes from bad to worse. "And how exactly would you suggest we push them, Miss O'Neill? The entire Mars defense fleet couldn't scratch their shields." I grinned. Not my professional grin, but the one that usually appears right before I do something stupid and brilliant. "You don't need to scratch their shields. You just need to make them work harder. Those shields, they're generating massive amounts of heat and their cooling systems can barely keep up. Push them hard enough and what?" Richards demanded. "And boom!" I made an explosive gesture with my hands, accidentally splashing coffee on some very expensive-looking equipment. "Or more likely, fzzzt. Either way, big problems for our squid-shaped friends." The room erupted in argument. Half the brass thought I was crazy. The other half thought I was brilliant, and all of them were missing the point entirely. I turned to Patel, who was still studying the thermal scans. "Notice anything else weird?" I asked her. She frowned. "The heat distribution patterns, they're familiar somehow." "They should be. They're exactly like the patterns you'd see in standard human-designed cooling systems. Exactly like them." Her eyes widened. "That's impossible. They're aliens, advanced aliens. Advanced aliens who somehow ended up with cooling systems that look suspiciously like they were copied from human engineering manuals." I finished the coffee. "Want to bet they didn't read the fine print about operational limitations?" Before Patel could respond, the base's alert system went berserk. The alien fleet had arrived, and they were heading straight for Lunar Base. Through the command center's massive windows, we could see them, massive, dark shapes, blotting out the stars. "Well," I said, watching the fleet approach, "looks like we're about to test my theory. Hope everybody's insurance is paid up." Admiral Chen stepped forward. "Miss O'Neill, how confident are you about this cooling system vulnerability?" I thought about all the times I'd seen similar systems fail in much less demanding conditions, about all the patches and workarounds I'd developed over the years, about how many times I'd cursed lazy engineering that copied old designs without understanding them. "Confident enough to bet my life on it," I said. which, given the situation, I guess I am. Good, she said, because I'm putting you in charge of exploiting it. The room went silent again, and this time I was the one surprised. I'm sorry, what? You understand these systems better than anyone else here, and we're out of options. Whatever plan you've got, it's now Plan A. I looked at Patel, who shrugged as if to say, well, we're probably going to die anyway. Right, I said, cracking my knuckles. I'm going to need access to a maintenance pod, all the technical data we have on their ships, and... I paused for dramatic effect. A really big wrench. That's it? Richards asked incredulously. That's your plan? Oh no, I grinned. That's just my toolkit. My plan is way stupider than that. But before I tell you, someone might want to get me more coffee. This is going to take some explaining. As if on cue, the alien flagship began broadcasting their demands. The same demands they'd made at Mars, except this time I wasn't paying attention to the words. I was listening to that whine in the background, getting higher and higher in pitch. Those ships were running hot and they didn't even know it. Sometimes, I thought, the best weapon isn't a gun or a bomb. Sometimes it's just knowing exactly where to stick a wrench. You know what's great about military command centers during an alien invasion? Nobody questions you requisitioning equipment. I could have asked for a nuclear-powered back-scratcher, and they would have just nodded and said Godspeed. What I actually requested was much more reasonable. A maintenance pod, 3 cases of industrial coolant, the biggest electromagnetic spanner in Lunar Base's inventory, and Tech Sergeant Patel as my co-pilot. They threw in a prototype stealth system for free. Nice of them, even if it did make suspicious clicking noises when activated. This is insane, Patel said as we prepped the pod. We're going to try to sneak up on the most advanced alien fleet humanity has ever encountered, in a maintenance pod. Technically, I corrected her, checking the coolant levels. We're going to sneak up on the most advanced alien fleet humanity has ever encountered in a maintenance pod that makes clicking noises. Important distinction. How is that important? Because if we're going to die, I want the historical record to accurately reflect how ridiculous our last moments were. The pod itself was nothing special, just your standard Mark VII external maintenance vehicle. Picture a space-worthy van designed by someone who really liked crabs, and you've got the idea. But it had one crucial advantage: it looked like maintenance equipment. In my experience, nobody, not even allegedly superior alien species, pays attention to maintenance equipment. As we suited up, Admiral Chen's voice came over the comm. O'Neill, final check. Run me through this plan one more time. I sighed. Their ships use a cooling system that's basically a fancy version of what we use in our mining equipment. The external access ports have to be in specific locations based on thermal dynamics. We find a port, I hook into their system, and then we introduce some problems. Problems. The kind that happen when you dump industrial coolant mixed with lunar-based septic system cleaning solution into a high-grade military cooling system. There was a long pause. That's going to work? Either it works or we die horribly and someone else can try something more sensible. I checked my toolkit one last time. Ready for launch. The maintenance bay doors opened, giving us our first real view of the alien fleet. They hung in lunar orbit like massive metal jellyfish, their hulls gleaming with that odd iridescent sheen that spelled really expensive shields to anyone who knew what they were looking at. Engaging stealth system, Patel announced as we launched. The clicking started immediately. Click, click, click. That's not very stealthy, she muttered. Could be worse, I offered. Could be playing music. As if the universe wanted to prove me right, the alien flagship chose that moment to broadcast another message. The same mechanical whine underlay their words, but now I could hear it getting worse. Their cooling systems were struggling with the power demands of maintaining their shields in lunar orbit. We approached the nearest ship, a smaller vessel that was probably their equivalent of a destroyer. Up close, the alien engineering was even more familiar than I'd expected. That's impossible, Patel breathed, staring at our scanner readings. These hull plates, they're made of space aluminum. Space aluminum. You know, that standardized alloy we use for everything because it's cheap and easy to maintain. I started laughing. They copied everything, didn't they? Just downloaded human engineering specs and supersized them without understanding the limitations. Getting to the access port was easier than expected. It was right where it would be on a human vessel, just bigger, much bigger. The alien engineers had apparently believed that making everything larger would solve the heat problems. Spoiler alert, that's not how thermodynamics works. "All right," I said, maneuvering our pod into position. "Time to introduce a little chaos into their system." That's when everything went wrong. See, there's this thing about alien ships that apparently nobody thought to mention. They have automated cleaning cycles. We found this out when the entire section of hull we were approaching suddenly sparked with electrical discharge. "External sterilization sequence," Patel yelled, yanking our pod backward. "They're cleaning the hull." The discharge followed us, arcing through space like hungry lightning. Our pod systems went haywire, including the stealth device, which stopped clicking and started playing Never Gonna Give You Up at full volume. "Did they just rickroll us?" Patel shouted over the music. "Less analyzing, more evading," I shouted back, wrestling with the controls. The pod spun, dodging another arc of electricity, and then something very lucky happened. Or very unlucky, depending on how you look at it. The cleaning discharge hit our coolant tanks. There was a moment of pure chaos, alarms blaring, Rick Astley singing, Patel swearing in 3 languages, and then we were suddenly inside the alien ship, having been sucked through the very access port we were trying to reach when the coolant tanks exploded. We landed in what was obviously an engineering bay. How did I know it was an engineering bay? Because it looked exactly like every engineering bay I'd ever worked in, just with more tentacle-friendly interfaces. "Well," I said, checking to make sure all my limbs were still attached, "that's one way to get inside." Patel was staring at something behind me, her face pale. Ratchet? We have company." I turned around to find myself face to face with an alien engineer. At least I assumed it was an engineer. It was wearing what appeared to be the alien equivalent of oil-stained coveralls, and holding something that could only be a space wrench. "Hi," I said, wiggling my fingers in what I hoped was a universal greeting. "Quick question. How's your cooling system holding up?" The alien engineer looked at my wrench, looked at their wrench, then back at me. They made a series of clicks and whistles that my translator rendered as, "Did you also come to fix the terrible cooling system?" Of all the possible responses to crash landing in an alien engine room, that wasn't one I'd expected. "What?" "The cooling system," they repeated, gesturing with their wrench at a massive bank of machinery that was indeed making that worrying whine I'd heard in their transmissions. "It's terrible. Everything's terrible. Command keeps saying it's working as intended, but it's not. Nothing works as intended." Patel and I exchanged glances. "So you're not going to alert security?" she asked carefully. The alien, who introduced themselves with a series of musical tones that my translator simply gave up on and labelled as Todd, made a gesture that somehow conveyed extreme exasperation, despite their completely inhuman anatomy. "Security is busy trying to fix their own cooling systems. Nobody listens to engineering anyway. Did you know they copied these designs from your human data networks without even checking the comment section?" "The comment section?" I felt a headache coming on. "Please tell me you're not saying what I think you're saying." "Oh yes," Todd whistled mournfully. "The entire invasion fleet was built using technical diagrams from something called, quote, opensourcespacecraft.com. "That website's a joke," I said weakly. "It's where engineering students post their theoretical designs to get feedback on why they wouldn't work." "We know that now," Todd replied, "but try telling that to Command. They're all failed art students who thought engineering would be easier." Patel had wandered over to one of the diagnostic panels. "Holy shit," she muttered. "They literally copied and pasted the designs. They didn't even change the variable names. They're still in English." I looked around the engine room with new eyes. Everything was oversized, over-engineered, and fundamentally flawed in exactly the way you'd expect if someone took a first-year engineering student's theoretical design and built it without understanding basic physics. "The invasion fleet," I said slowly, "the most terrifying armada humanity has ever seen, was built by art students working from untested plans they found on the internet. Todd made a sound like a sad trombone. The shields work great, though, until they overheat, which they always do. But you won their battles at Mars, Patel pointed out. Luck, Todd clicked dismissively, and Mars was cold that day. We had to retreat every time the ship started overheating, but Command kept saying it was for tactical reasons. I was about to respond when the entire ship shuddered. The whining from the cooling system jumped up an octave. Ah, Todd said, that would be the shields entering full power mode for the attack on your base. We have about 20 minutes before complete system failure. Complete system failure? Patel and I asked simultaneously. Oh yes, the art students thought it would look more dramatic if the ships glowed during battle. Do you know what happens to cooling systems when you make the entire hull glow? I did know. It was the kind of knowledge that made me want to bang my head against the nearest solid surface. Why haven't you said anything? Todd's translator crackled as they laughed. I submitted 73 maintenance reports. Command said I was being unnecessarily negative and suggested I take up painting. Another shudder ran through the ship. Warning lights started flashing. Right, I said, pulling out my tools. Patel, get to that control panel and give me access to the main coolant flow. Todd, show me the primary heat exchangers. We've got about 19 minutes to prevent this ship from becoming the galaxy's biggest light show. Command will never allow it, Todd warned, even as they moved to help. I grinned. Command's about to learn an important lesson about ignoring their engineering department. Also, fair warning, I learned most of my repair techniques in a waste management facility. This fix is not going to be pretty. Pretty is what got us into this mess, Todd replied, pulling out their own tools. I'm ready for ugly. And that's how I ended up conducting emergency repairs on an alien warship, with the help of a disgruntled extraterrestrial engineer named Todd. While the fate of humanity hung in the balance, and the most advanced invasion fleet in history threatened to destroy itself through bad engineering practices. Just another day in maintenance, really. There's an old saying in engineering, anything that can go wrong will go wrong. But nobody ever mentions the corollary. Sometimes things going wrong is exactly what you need. Warning, critical system failure imminent, announced the ship's AI in a voice that somehow managed to sound both bored and panic-stricken. Suggestion, accept death with dignity. Can we turn that off? I asked, elbow deep in alien coolant pipes. Todd made an adjustment on their control panel. The AI switched to what sounded like alien elevator music, punctuated by occasional explosion sounds. That's not better, Patel commented from her position at the main engineering console. Temperature's still rising. We've got maybe 10 minutes before the art students' light show becomes a fireworks display. I yanked another cable free, splicing it into the jury-rigged system we'd been building. Okay. Here's where we find out if human engineering stupidity and alien engineering stupidity cancel each other out. Our plan was simple in the way that extremely desperate last-minute ideas are always simple. We were going to use the ship's own design flaws against it. The oversized cooling system might be terrible at cooling, but it made a fantastic circulation system for spreading problems around. Ready with the waste management protocols? I called to Patel. She gave me a thumbs up. Lunar Base's finest septic system maintenance routines ready to upload to their system. Still think this will work? Either it works or we become a very unusual footnote in the history of both our species, I replied, then turned to Todd. Hit it. Todd pressed what looked suspiciously like an enter key. Seriously, they'd copied everything, and our program began uploading into the ship's systems. For a moment, nothing happened. Then everything happened at once, and the ship's lights flickered, the elevator music switched to what sounded like alien death metal, and somewhere above us we heard the distinctive sound of very expensive military hardware beginning to malfunction in spectacular fashion. "What did you do?" demanded a new voice, one that my translator identified as belonging to the ship's commander, broadcasting ship-wide. I grabbed the nearest comm panel. "This is Danny O'Neill, Lunar Base Waste Management. I've introduced your cooling system to some basic maintenance protocols, specifically the kind we use to clean out septic systems." "How dare you," the commander began, but was interrupted by their own life support system making sounds that suggested it was regretting its life choices. Here's the thing about copying designs without understanding them, I continued cheerfully. You never know what backdoors were left in the original code. Like the emergency maintenance overrides we build into all our waste management systems, which you copied and which I just activated. The ship shuddered again, but this time it was different. This was the shudder of a machine realizing it had options other than what its designers intended. You have 1 hour before every system on this ship needs recalibration, I announced. I suggest starting with life support, because that septic cleaning program is very thorough. The commander's next words were drowned out by alarms as other ships in the fleet began reporting similar issues. Apparently, they really had used the exact same design for everything. We should probably get to an escape pod, I told Patel and Todd. This is about to get messy. Define messy, Patel said warily. Before I could answer, the ship's AI came back online. Warning, initiating full system purge. Have a nice day. We ran. Behind us, the sound of mechanical chaos spread through the ship like a wave. The invasion fleet's mighty engines, copied from untested designs and built by art students, were about to demonstrate why you should always read the user manual. From the escape pod's viewport, we watched as the alien fleet began what I can only describe as a synchronized malfunction dance. Ships spun in circles, emergency vents fired randomly, and shield generators produced interesting colors that definitely weren't in the original specifications. I feel like I should mention, Todd said as we accelerated away from the flagship, that I recorded everything. For the maintenance logs, of course. Of course, I agreed, nothing to do with having proof that engineering was right all along. Obviously not, they clicked innocently, though if it somehow finds its way to command. Behind us, the mighty invasion fleet continued its unplanned performance art piece, proving once and for all that the laws of physics don't care how dramatic your invasion plans are. Sometimes saving humanity isn't about grand battles or clever strategies. Sometimes it's just about knowing exactly how things can go wrong, and then helping them go wrong in exactly the right way. The peace negotiations were held in Lunar Base's largest maintenance bay, not because anyone planned it that way, but because that's where the alien fleet's command staff ended up after their ships unanimously decided to dock for emergency maintenance. I sat at the negotiating table between Admiral Chen and Commander Richards, still wearing my grease-stained coveralls. Across from us sat the alien commander, 3 art students turned engineers, and Todd, who had somehow been promoted to Chief of Engineering after providing extensive video evidence of being right all along. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly," Admiral Chen said, maintaining an admirably straight face. "You want to surrender and apply for an engineering cultural exchange program?" The alien commander's translator crackled with what sounded like embarrassment. "We may have been overconfident in our technical capabilities. You copied homework you found on the internet," I corrected, without checking if it actually worked. Yes, well, they shifted uncomfortably. In retrospect, perhaps conquering Earth was less practical than learning how Earth maintains its equipment. Commander Richards, whose toupee had somehow survived the entire crisis at that same rakish angle, cleared his throat. "And what makes you think we're interested in sharing our technical expertise with a species that just tried to invade us?" Todd raised one appendage. "We have extensive documentation of how not to build things. Surely that's worth something." I couldn't help it. I started laughing. The kind of deep, uncontrollable laughter that comes from realizing that the universe is even more absurd than you thought. "Give them the training," I managed to say between gasps. "On one condition." Everyone turned to look at me. "They have to start in waste management, sir." And that's how Lunar Base became the galaxy's premier technical training facility. We started with the basics, actual engineering principles, not just copying and pasting designs. Todd turned out to be an excellent instructor, especially after they convinced their government to fund a proper engineering education program, instead of another invasion fleet. The art students who had designed the original fleet were reassigned to create technical documentation, where their flair for the dramatic actually proved useful. Turns out, maintenance manuals are much more effective when they're entertaining. Patel took charge of the cultural exchange program, teaching aliens from across the galaxy about the importance of reading comment sections and actually testing designs before building them. She still maintains that her greatest achievement was introducing the concept of percussive maintenance to 7 different species. As for me, I went back to waste management robotics, but with a significantly expanded department. Turns out, every spacefaring species has garbage, and they all need help dealing with it. My team now includes engineers from 12 different planets, and yes, they all started by learning how to fix cleaning robots. The original invasion fleet, we turned it into a teaching museum. How Not to Engineer Things, a multi-species retrospective. It's become quite popular, especially the hourly demonstration of what happens when you prioritize looking cool over basic functionality. The aliens still haven't lived down the fact that their unstoppable invasion force was defeated by a maintenance worker with a wrench and some septic system protocols. But they're learning. Last week, one of my alien students actually asked to see the maintenance logs before starting a repair job. I've never been prouder. Oh, and that WM-209 cleaning bot that I was fixing when this all started. It's still running, despite being held together with spare parts from 8 different planets. The aliens use it as an example of proper engineering principles. It's not pretty, it's not dramatic, but it works. Sometimes that's all you really need. As for humanity's place in the galaxy, well, we're not known for our superior technology or our powerful weapons. Instead, we've become famous for something far more important. We're the species that actually reads the manual, and if you ask me, that's worth more than all the glowing shield generators in the universe.